There's an interesting story about a housing association officer who has been sacked, who's been politically purged, a man called Sabur Sidi, who's been purged from his association because of his association with Reform UK. And the case is not just about one man losing his job, nor indeed about any form of support for Reform UK. If anybody's watching this YouTube video and knows my channel, they will know that I'm not likely to be that indulgent towards Reform UK. But I am interested in principles, and I am interested in unfairness. And it's not a. So I don't think this is about one man losing his job. I think it's about the creeping trend of ideological conformity being enforced in workplaces, particularly in the public and charitable sectors, in so things like housing associations, schools, and so on. And I think this needs looking at with the sort of surgical precision of a damp and mould inspector, a job that Mr. Poor Saidi was ironically also considered unfit to inhabit. And Mr. Poor Saidi, a father of two, originally from Iran, was dismissed by the Hightown Housing Association, one of Britain's largest housing associations, for what they claim was a conflict between his political affiliations and the organisation's views. And Reform UK, the party he represents, is often branded as right-wing and nationalist, with policies on immigration, net zero, housing that ostensibly conflict with Hightown's progressive ethos. The association went so far as to cite his retweeting of a matte cartoon, as evidence of his unfitness, his unsuitability for the £37,000 a year role. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Matt Pritchard's work, you have to think gentle humour with the sharpness of a teaspoon, hardly the material for a rabid extremist, and therefore I don't fully understand it. The cartoon in question mocked the potential purchase of the Telegraph by Abu Dhabi investors, and yet it was labelled racist. Now, I've looked at the cartoon in some detail. The caption is, "Don't worry, darling, if the UAE buys the Telegraph, I doubt the cartoons will change." I'm not sure who is the person in the cartoon who's saying that, whether it's the man reading the newspaper or whether it's the person coming in with 2 mugs of tea wearing a burqa. I don't fully understand the cartoon either. I must confess, the cartoon defeats me. So if anybody actually has a better understanding of what this cartoon is about, please let me know. But the accusation of it being racist in and of itself is an accusation that frankly raises more eyebrows than it does valid points. Now, the Hightown contends that Mr. Poor Saidi's position as a Reform candidate and county coordinator created an untenable conflict of interest. Their reasoning: Reform's policies on immigration clash with Hightown's mission of housing immigrants and supporting refugees. Reform's scepticism of net zero policies jars with Hightown's environmental goals. And Reform's desire to preserve the Greenbelt is at odds with Hightown's housing expansion plans. On the surface, this seems a principled stance, but let's unpack it. It's truly incompatible with someone who opposes political views to perform a professional role. That's the issue, and I don't think that's part of our that's part of our makeup, or that's part of our ethos for employing somebody. Your political views are independent of your professional role. So does retweeting a cartoon and advocating for political reform in one's free time render one incapable of handling the delicate intricacies of, say, damp proofing or tenant engagement? Or is this simply an overzealous attempt to police thought? The Free Speech Union, which is backing Mr. Poor Saidi's case, accuses Hightown of operating double standards. They point to Hightown's head of governance, who stood as a Labour candidate in 2019, and apparently being a Labour supporter aligns seamlessly with Hightown's values, while Reform UK's platform doesn't. It seems one's political colours determine one's fitness for employment. Red is fine, blue and white not so much. And this raises serious questions about fairness. Should organisations be allowed to apply selective moral litmus tests on the grounds of political affiliation? If an employee can park their political beliefs at the door, should their affiliations matter? Or are we perhaps descending into a world where party membership determines career prospects? That sounds like Nazi Germany. And this case is emblematic of a larger cultural shift. Increasingly, workplaces are becoming arenas for ideological battles. The private and the charitable sectors, once bastions of professionalism, now seem intent on enforcing ideological purity. Mr. Saidi's dismissal has been likened to Nigel Farage's battle with Coutts Bank, where his accounts were closed over his political views. Both cases highlight an unsettling trend. Dissenting voices, especially on the right, are being marginalised under the guise of values alignment. And then we've got the whole issue of social media and things like YouTube and Facebook and what people are allowed to post if they're employed. Values are subjective. And what if an organisation's values evolve? What if tomorrow Hightown decides that being an ardent environmentalist conflicts with its need to cut costs on energy-efficient housing? Where does that end? The irony is palpable. Hightown claims to champion inclusion, yet excludes those who don't share its ideological stance. It claims to stand for diversity, yet penalises diversity of thought when it doesn't conform. It seems that in some quarters tolerance only extends to those who agree with the ruling elite. In other words, diversity of thought is simply a catchphrase that means nothing. Inclusion is simply a catchphrase that means nothing. And the elephant in the room, or perhaps the damp patch on the wall, was Mr. Saidi truly so dangerous that tenants would be distressed by the knowledge of his reform affiliation? One could argue that a competent professional who respects tenants' rights is far less distressing than, say, a negligent one. And beyond the political and the legal wrangling, there's a human story here. Mr. Saidi, a man with Iranian roots, a wife, 2 children, finds himself vilified and unemployed because of his political affiliation. He describes feeling like vermin, a damning indictment of how far we've drifted from the ideals of fairness and respect and inclusion and diversity. The case is also a cautionary tale for employers. By overreaching in their quest for ideological conformity, organisations risk alienating talented individuals and undermining trust in impartiality. So this case will go to the courts, and it will undoubtedly set a precedent. If Mr. Saidi's claim succeeds, it will affirm the principle that philosophical beliefs, even unpopular ones, deserve protection under the law. And if it fails, it will embolden employers to continue pursuing those who don't toe their ideological line. In a democracy, freedom of thought and association should be sacrosanct. If we allow the noose of political conformity to tighten, we